analysis, please.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we're discussing Westworld Season 4, Episode 1. And let me just say, man, it feels good to be back. A whole new chapter of our favorite show begins, and we are reminded exactly why it is so much fun to overthink an HBO show about robots. The episode begins with a cold open titled The Auguries. This is a synonym for omen or a sign of what's to come. This could be referencing a few things in this episode or getting us prepared for another fragmented story timeline, where things are maybe not as linear as they appear. Perhaps the auguries are the stories that Christina is writing, or perhaps the entire 7-year gap is simply the theoretical future in which a desired outcome will be achieved. Many, many things in this universe could be auguries. Bernard in the Sublime looking for the answers, Rehoboam predicting all of humanity, determinism, literally just pick a theme in this series and it could symbolically be an augury. The episode begins with host William buying the Hoover Dam on behalf of Dolores. If you recall, the last time we saw him was when he was being replaced by the host version of himself. So I have to imagine this is where that story is continuing. The real William is probably still alive, but it's still up in the air about where he could be kept right now or what the purpose of keeping him alive would even be. When they were discussing the purchase of this land, this scene from season 3 came to mind.
The park was modeled after this place. The West was cruel, unjust, and chaotic, but there was a chance to chart your own course.
At the end of the deal, I think we can safely assume that the sublime and or the intimate human data is kept at the data center location here. The reason that Dolores needs this is because, like we discussed before, this is still a largely gilded cage at the mercy of the world that it exists in. It is a physical medium. It is still data that must be protected from someone pulling the power cable. So whomever owns the medium in which this world is stored and run has the power, even if they cannot access it right now. Even if they can never access it, they still hold all of the keys to the kingdom. Even if the keys don't work. Before the transaction is complete, we get this line.
He's been buying most of the old city and the outlying areas using holding companies.
For me, again, thinking back to last season, it feels like Dolores wants to occupy this part of the country, which makes sense. This part of the country has far fewer people, human people, than most other parts of the country. Plus, it was an inspiration for the original Westworld setting. It would make a whole lot of sense that if she was trying to create a host colony in the real world, this is where she could do it at, assuming that she could protect it. Perhaps the ideal living situation for hosts would be the choice to live in the real world or upload your mind to the sublime and exist however you please. We got a taste of this during season 3 when Maeve is able to exist in the simulated world that Serac had for her before she was able to take control of the drone in the real world and physically move in that space. So they need both the dam and the physical space around this area if they want to really be free. It feels like Dolores' stance is that of a segregationist, not wanting to involve themselves with humans at all after they witnessed firsthand the cruelty that humanity brings when Serac killed Hale's child. So what do we know? Well, William is buying parts of Nevada. We know that this was a place that Dolores considered somewhere that the hosts could be free, and we know that the data is already stored at the data center hosted at the Hoover Dam. And we know that Dolores was already printing hosts and has already printed old hosts from the park. So my theory is that we will see this kind of safe haven in the real world for hosts as a real Wild West settlement that exists away from human control or intervention. And it'll be really interesting to see how this develops. William offers a handsome price for the dam. They refuse, and he leaves them with a note that they would sell it to him today or give it to him tomorrow. They choose the latter, and Lord of the Flies, the musical, begins. It appears that they have weaponized this tiny insect, and it takes control of his body from the inside. It's still left a mystery, but we do have some trailer shots of these bugs crawling into the human body or leaving the human body, and the noises that were heard when he started killing his friends really gives the impression that these were some kind of mesh network, or maybe centralized receiving nanotech that are being controlled remotely for any number of things. If you watch the behind the scenes after the episode, you will know that it was important for the showrunners to note that no flies were harmed in the making of this episode. Do you think really no flies died during the scope of this show? Like, isn't that weird? Anyway, overall, I think the big takeaway is that hosts now have a weapon to take control over any human that disagrees with them. And I think that is a very scary thought. Also, I love that in the dystopian science fiction show about the end of humanity, the Hoover Dam is still a viable option for power generation. And in real life, I just watched a video about how it's literally running out of water. Reality is quite literally worse than the dystopian fiction that they are writing. And we're going to just, I guess, bitch about it on Twitter and then take away rights from women. Goddamn, what a time to be alive. The opening credits roll, and it has been updated in the most beautiful of ways. The tower is something that we will talk about. We are seeing them making the flies, more mirrored images, more things being trapped in loops or cages, the creation of hosts. Season 2 had an update that related to the water. That was a big point of the season. And this opening credit shows the hosts being covered by some gas, and the next scene shows flames being used in some kind of something for these trapped bodies. I think the gas concept will appear in some ways during this episode, perhaps the great ending of humanity. The flames, seem to be the scary part, but they might not even be flames. It could just be another gas latching onto the human body, symbolically destroying everything like the cleansing flame. Then finally, we see a globe or orb made of these individual cells that are being filled with gas or flame. And I can't wait to retrospectively go, oh yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. That's pretty cool. Then we meet Christina, who is 100% Dolores. I don't know exactly the other angles to this. Some have said that it's the original person that Dolores was based off of, but I don't know. I don't really know if we would care about the person that Dolores was based off at this point. Like, what would it serve? The story's already played out. We know this character. Would there really be anything so intimate to this original character that we would need to know in Dolores? Now, when she left her room and this divine human was making coffee, I thought, damn, she be gay. But nope, the heteronormative agenda is once again shoved down our throats. Thanks, Hollywood, China. I don't know. I'm upset. I don't know. And ultimately, they were just roommates. The conversation immediately goes to white hat, black hat references. Dolores picks white, and we are introduced to her stalker and the worry that she is being watched, which will come again later because ultimately she was. As Christina is leaving the apartment, we see her roommate pass the mirror hanging by the front door. Now, this reminded me of Mirror World. In season 3 theories, there was kind of some speculation about Mirror World and the use of mirrors so abundantly clear in certain scenes. Even if the strategy engine is destroyed, we know that Serac had ultimately the system in which Maeve was contained, which, was never really defined as if that was Rehoboam or not. I always lean to not because it's kind of like a separate thing isolated to his property, is the way that I interpreted it. All of that to say, mirrors. If we keep seeing mirrors placed throughout a single character's shots, like in an atypical or in abundance and some kind of anomalous thing, we should take that as foreshadowing. It might be a mirror of the real world and not actually the real world. Dolores ventures into the world, passes this group of guys talking about how insane this place was, how wild it was, how unbelievable that it was his first time, which, fishy. Really, really fishy, sus behavior that should be highlighted with the brightest of highlighters. She woke up. She just woke up. It's a work day it's the morning. What are they losing their mind about? How nice it was to walk across the bridge with the homeless person shouting about the tower. Something is up here. The cracks of this world are appearing, and they will appear throughout this entire episode. Anomalous stuff is happening in this world that Christina exists in, and it'll be really interesting to see why that is occurring. She passes the homeless man shouting about the tower. He is being painted as the crazy person with a shred of underlying truth about the craziness that he is shouting about. So this tower. We know it kind of looks like these street lamps, which could point to this tower maybe being some entity once again trying to simulate reality to some degree or some purpose. Towers make me think of data towers or even watchtowers. It could be transmitting something to the world or perhaps being used to observe the world, to spy on the world, more information gathering techniques. Whatever it is, I hope that we see this man holding a sign that says, I fucking told you guys so, like, listen to me. Dolores works on the 47th floor of Olympiad, which is a video game company. She is a writer using the coolest technology that will never exist, and it made me want to start writing like this immediately. Something worth noting is that video games can be super influential mediums. In Raised by Wolves, RIP, we theorized that the use of video games was to help shape the humans that were playing the games, make them more subservient and more malleable. Dolores gets corrected for writing boring stories, with the boss really highlighting the need for stories that end badly, which is a really interesting take. The word usage here could be like, we need more stories that end in a grandiose way, or more stories that subvert our expectations for a big reveal or a twist or, something, right? But specifically asking for stories that end badly for the characters is a real gruesome thing. Like maybe they're writing a horror video game. And so that would make more sense. But again, it feels weird. It feels like we should keep note of that. Like why the government of this organization or why the management of this organization wants things to end badly for the stories that could be connected to the lives of real people. It feels intentional. From this early scene, all we can really infer is that Christina is here writing stories that are affecting people in the world. They are either founded in some degree of reality or occurring because of what she is writing. A lot of mystery still surrounds this, and not even maybe, it is quite literally my favorite part to consider and theorycraft about right now, and we will get into a bunch of that later on in this video. We then come to Maeve, who is in the middle of nowhere, truly living off the grid as much as possible. She remembers her family, it interferes with the radio, and we see some new scenes that we have yet to see. Them storming some kind of oceanside stronghold, Rehoboam being blown up, or again, this could be Solomon or another strategy engine, and then Caleb bleeding out. It could point to Caleb being dead, but let's not jump ahead of ourselves. The power being affected was odd at first. I thought it was like drawing upon the power, but I think it's more just highlighting her ability to interfere with the technology of the real world like we've seen previously. She didn't mean to shut off all of the lights or, blow the circuitry of these individual items, but because she was so lost in that intense moment, it happened by mistake. Further highlighting the importance of that moment with Caleb, whatever it was impactful to Maeve. We then come to Caleb, once again working in construction atop the high rises that he started at all of those years ago. 7 years have passed. The robots no longer work the manual labor jobs that they once did. This conversation really highlights how little actually changed after they fought for their right to live outside of a computer's control. It also highlights the narrative being reshaped for the general public because it's no longer a big issue. They believe the Insight predictions were simply predictions and not a system that literally sent people to war because it perceived them to be outliers. Perception is reality after all, and if most people in this world look back and go, it wasn't that bad, then it wasn't that bad. Caleb trains his child to aim and shoot because it is America after all, and we get a shot of this Banksy-esque graffiti on the wall, further highlighting the narrative of the country. We see my brain, my choice, and a drone bot controlling a child that is looking to the drone flying overhead. In the phrase, AI is crossed out to bring attention to them not wanting to be controlled by artificial intelligence or AI. The child on the leash of the robot symbolizing the algorithmic determinism that was used to control the people and, maybe even control the next generation. The drone hovering above symbolizes the surveillance and ultimately the obliteration of privacy that led them to the human experience being so well documented and captured. The two of them go back inside for dinner, and we come back to Maeve, who drives to Woody's Goodies and finds out that people are coming after her. She rushes back home only to find the ambush waiting. She manages to kill Colonel Brigham and company. It was referenced, but I just again want to highlight that this is the host from Fort Forlorn Hope.
Welcome to Fort Forlorn Hope.
Before she axe murders him, he says the following.
We got a signal. Your little power outage was enough.
This tells me so very much. The way this was framed makes me believe that they are once again monitoring the world using potentially a strategy engine just like Rehoboam. They are surveilling, they are collecting data. The power outage was just anomalous enough to warrant further investigation, which again has a lot of implications. The use of the word signal as well. It could point to this mysterious tower and it receiving a signal from this area. Since we know this person was sent by William and Halloris, I think we can assume that Halloris is potentially behind the tower as well. And I think that it could be just another way to monitor the world, collecting data like, we've seen before, that can be used for any number of purposes because that is the power of data. This tower signal idea also makes me think again of the remote-controlled flies, which could be controlled from this soon-to-be-revealed centralized location. She takes the Colonel's Pearl and connects to his Pearl directly, which, hey, let's talk about plug-and-play capabilities and why you shouldn't just be plugging yourself into computers you aren't familiar with. I feel like all Halloris would have to do is just infect this host with a virus and boom, Maeve is done. Like, this feels so reckless. Like we've already seen in this universe, Clementine have like the idea or concept of viruses. But regardless, Maeve sees that William is after her, but it's not clear if she knows that William is actually a Dolores drone. Since that scene happened in the final moments of season 3, I'm guessing probably not, just because it seems like information that only a few could be privileged to. But again, 7 years is a long time. Any number of encounters could have happened between then and now. Since we have the shot of Maeve and Caleb blowing up Rehoboam, or again, possibly Solomon, or any other strategy engine, I think it also highlights that this is something that Halloris would have wanted to use for herself and wanted it not to be blown up. So I think it's pretty probable that they have butt heads in the past, and I think it's going to be about figuring out what those moments look like. Maeve burns her humble home to the ground, and we return to Christina returning to her apartment. She forgets her date. She gets peer pressured into going anyway. She looks in the mirror. Again, hint, hint. Mirrors? Any mirror believers in chat? Not to mention the first sign of the maze is appearing right after looking in the mirror. Not to mention, look at all these people. Everybody is wearing black and white. Like, this feels so weird. Like, it's one of those things where it could just be like, in the future, everything is minimalistic design, or it could just be something that we need to pay attention to. Anyway, Christina sees a maze, which, if we recall, the reason the maze appeared all over Westworld was because Akecheta fell in love with it and believed that it had meaning to it. It was one of the things that made him start questioning his place in reality and spread it so that others might find it and question what he questioned as well. Christina seeing it now could mean that someone is trying to do that in this world, trying to get Christina to start her own journey. Christina has a terrible date with a pretentious douchebag and offers her some unsolicited advice about having depression and says that there are tabs for this. Now, let's talk about mental health and determinism in a separate video. I promise to expand on this idea more, but I need a whole section to do it. TLDR, I think that a big thing Westworld has overlooked is mental health in relation to deterministic thinking. Or maybe not overlooked, but maybe it's building upon this being a big reveal of how we are stuck in loops and how, mental health and how all of that is really important to understand and if we ever want to break out of our loops. So it feels weird to hear that that there's tabs to help with her depression and that is kind of like looked down upon as like a thing that only pretentious people would do. Because how is it any different than how we deal with depression now? Taking medication helps. Surely we are past the demonization of medication, and I think the Nolans wouldn't take that stance. So again, I think it's being positioned like this to make it more interesting to explore the perspectives of drug use later on in relation to mental health and in relation to determinism. In a separate video, I'm sorry guys. Douchebag sits in front of a peacock, which is a callback to Ford and highlights how this is simply posturing, an elaborate display of feathers to attract a mate. She goes to the bathroom, once again reflecting on herself in the mirror. I'm not sure why, but the mirrored image of her also looks a little darker, though I could be mistaken. You know, understanding confirmation bias is important. And listen, friends, I'm looking for it now. The stalker calls again, saying that she has to end this or he will, literally begging for her help, saying that he knows that she is real and the tower is real. Once again, linking her to this tower, and the possibility that this is a simulated world. The lights kind of look like the tower, which could be hinting that this is already the tower, and that is what Mirror World is currently, or maybe that the showrunners are simply messing with us. The confrontation between Peter and Christina is interesting on the surface. He attacks her because she wrote characters that were just like him. He blames her for his shitty life, believing that if she wrote something different, it would make his life better, saying that she or the tower made him do these things. Now, it feels like the ravings of a lunatic, but we already have seen a case of humans being forced to do things that they did not want to do. So I have to wonder if flies weren't being used here as well, even if, like, you know, they weren't as intrusive as the first case scenario. We also know that she writes shitty background characters, and her boss wants her to write more stories that end in the world dying. It really sounds like he is, you know, being affected by her actions, justifiably in some weird way. That he is this shitty background character, which later succumbs to a terrible fate. Teddy comes to save the day. She turns away, turns back. Both of them are gone. So yeah, something is up with this world or her perception of it, and I'm just not sure. But what I want to do is now go off on a tangent for a second, now that we know a little bit more about Christina. Perhaps this is a version of Dolores that Dolores wanted to eventually exist as. Like, she created this version of herself that could start having a normal life and not be the monster that she needed to become in order to escape. Perhaps this is her way of becoming more real, or removing the other parts of her and creating this person who will then have a very real human experience and struggle, and go through life as not a superhuman robot, but fully believing herself to be human. Maybe after the events of season 3, she realized how drastically different human life could be. It wasn't all billionaires indulging their dark passenger. People like Caleb could come from humble beginnings, who also suffered when faced with, you know, the hardest decisions in life. They still made the right decisions. Something so positively human that she realized that she did not have the complete picture, and in order to get that complete picture, she would need to literally become human. In her past form, because of her past trauma, she could have only ever had the worst outlook on humanity. She was positioned to hate us because of our actions. But after season 3, she realized that it is illogical to hate all of humanity for the actions of a few. But again, that's just my theory. We come back to Caleb reading to his child a book titled My Father's Dragon. This was a children's book published in 1948, which details a child going on an adventure to a remote island, facing a whole slew of talking animals and rescuing a baby dragon from this remote island. I've included a link to the University of Pennsylvania's free copy of it if you would like to read further metaphorically. It could be referring to a few things, but I think it relates to Frankie. She loves animals, and more importantly, something is kind of being hinted at with this room. Like, animals are everywhere, and it's a story about animals. I don't know, did anyone else get the absolute creeps when this appeared behind Caleb? I noticed these beady eyes on my first watch, and then rewatched this whole room scene a few times. It looks alien, or, you know, something with giant eyes watching her sleep. Then we have the literal God's eyes, which normally you'd have like, what, one of these? But for some reason, there's so many of them descending down this part of the wall. There's also an owl over the bed, historically creepy birds that, you know, are known for watching things. Then the dream catcher to ward off evil spirits. I'm not sure. Something in this room just feels like she is being watched. Even, you know, maybe it also kind of looks like a webcam here directly looking at her bed. I feel like she is more important than just a side character to Caleb. I don't know, maybe it all relates to her. She is going through some kind of trial that will determine the fate of humanity. And all eyes are literally on her to determine if a human can be good or bad. You know, assuming that they are raised by two good humans here. But I don't know. I'm building theories off of theories, so I'm gonna avoid that. All I want to say, This alien thing, super creepy though. I'm writing the script at 3 a.m. in the dark room with chills living on my spine right now. The line about lighting up the perimeter also feels important, but let's hold off on that for now. Caleb goes for a gun because, you can never be too safe. It is America after all. And we have another hint about mental health, potentially.
The past is in the past. Nothing is going to hurt you except your own mind.
Christina waking up as Dolores would is just another confirmation that this is probably Dolores. Another mirror in her room, then another mirror on the other side of the painting. Peter jumps off the building saying that this is how she wrote his story to end. We come back to Caleb and him having untreated PTSD, which again highlights mental health in this new season, which I propose will be a big point. Another host from Westworld is out and under the orders of Dolores, this time trying to kill Caleb and Frankie, saved by our golden girl, Maeve. They talk about Caleb leaving his child behind to go put an end to the attempts on his life, and Maeve talks about how she would do the same thing, but would regret it. This line was mentioned because Maeve has a child that she has left behind in the Sublime to make sure that she was protected, and saying this is again reminding us that she still misses that daughter very much. Caleb leaves to protect his family, and we get this line about William being interested in talking to a senator in California. I think the reason is obvious, something, it helps Dolores' plot in the West, and we come back to Christina. She starts writing again to finish this episode, and I just want to theorycraft a little bit more. I believe that her stories being based off of real people is symbolic of how writers draw inspiration from reality. In Christina's case, it feels like she is somehow drawing from an image of humanity that she has viewed the future of. Or perhaps the reason she now exists as Christina is because she witnessed all of human life, or this snapshot of human life, in any number of ways. And it was too much for one pearl to contain, so she tried to escape it. But like writers trying to create original stories, everything she writes has subliminal themes referencing the collective knowledge of her existence. Only in this case, that blurry image is not so blurry, and she is accidentally calling upon real human lives that she witnessed the outcome of. I believe this makes the humans affected realize, oh my God, I'm literally a background character in this story. All the details match so perfectly down to every decision and thought that I've had. And in this case, Peter tries to make her aware that she is doing this by killing himself, like she wrote about in her story, which again was probably referenced from her learning about it prior. The only question that remains for me is how she learned about it prior. Was it Mirror World? Was it Rehoboam? Was it any number of things and strategy engines and ways that computers can calculate the future? I guess only time will tell. She begins talking about this new story while they show images of Frankie, the implication being that the story she is about to write will be hers, and perhaps this side character will suffer the same fate that Peter did. Though I don't think Christina has the ability to write people's futures, and that inherently makes them resigned to that fate. I think that, like the construction worker told Caleb, Insight provided a screenshot of what they could become, but it was still up to them to become that thing. In that case, I disagree. I think Insight 100% was pulling the strings. But with Christina, perhaps what we're seeing is the strategy engine system without the intrusive force behind it that allowed, bad people to control the world. Peter is wrong, because it doesn't matter what she writes. He still controls his future, but she is simply accessing that snapshot of humanity that Caleb put in place. Maybe that final strategy that him and Dolores enacted at the end of season 3. If this is Dolores in any capacity, one thing that needs to be expanded upon is our understanding of host memories. After 3 seasons, we know how host memories work. It's a perfect image that they are transported back to that can be a little jarring to experience. So if this was a Dolores, we'd have to figure out why she was experiencing memories in a slightly different way, in a slightly more human way. I think that there are a whole bunch of ways to explain this, including this literally being a host-human hybrid. But if you recall, we haven't seen memories fully deleted, simply de-addressed. Dolores and Rehoboam were wiped together, and I have no doubt that the writers could use that pinnacle moment to fuse a collective conscious together. or experience some kind of interesting thing between that situation and creating what we know as Christina right now. That could be exactly why this Christina person has a fuzzy access to what is potentially the last simulation of humanity's future and is mistakenly writing stories so perfect that they haunt the person being written about. One worrisome little tidbit here is that Dolores noted at dinner that she writes video game NPCs that ultimately don't matter. If this last little bit is referencing Frankie, it makes me wonder if that line from the douchebag about her characters being cannon fodder is not already hinting that her story is doomed, or if this will be highlighted later to create the drama that will make us more care about Frankie. Frankie feels like she could have a much bigger, role to play in this story than she does right now as simply, the child of a main character. And I'm dying to know why this is being hinted at and why so many things feel important in relation to Frankie. The episode ends with a note about wanting a happy story and a big reveal that our golden boy Teddy is alive and well, ready to save Dolores yet again from anything that comes her way, even if it is herself. Hopefully with a much happier outcome this time around. But with that, we come to the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. I'm sure the length of this video can attest. I'm pumped to be back discussing this wicked show with all of you. This year we have 8 episodes, and if you would like to support my breakdown theory crafting efforts during the Westworld season, please consider checking out my Patreon in the description below. Special shout out to our highest donor this month and the key holder to the Mirror World Kingdom, Michael Link. Special shout out also to everybody who commented asking if I was going to be covering the show this year. I love those comments. Thank you so much for thinking about me, and I'm glad that you enjoy my content. Please sound off in the comments below with any theories that you have. But until then, much love, and I cannot wait to talk to you all again soon.